All right, this is Friday, February 10th. As usual, this video will only represent my own personal opinions. I don't speak for anybody or anything. And any citations to things I discuss can be found down in the description of the video. So first, we're celebrating. By now, if you're the sort of person that's watching one of my videos, chances are you're also the sort of person that already knows that the Ninth Circuit came back with some stern words for Trump on his travel ban. They denied the stay that was requested by the government of the temporary restraining order, and they returned the case back to Robart, essentially, if Trump doesn't appeal up to the Supreme Court. He's our so-called judge, by the way, that Trump by now probably deeply regrets insulting on Twitter, particularly given the divide we're now seeing between him and Gorsuch. Citing the government's complete lack of evidence on the national necessity for the ban, and taking a long time to point out Flenge's claims that the acts of the president in this sphere are unreviewable. They took severe issue with that. They noted that they had no interest in limiting the TRO, and that it was not their job to rewrite the executive order to make it less, illegal. And with the government unable to show that the stay is necessary to avoid irreparable injury, the court said the public interest far outweighed the government's in this case. Now, a reason why this is very important that really isn't getting as much coverage as I think it should, we have basically seen a circuit court acknowledge that a state does have standing to represent its citizens in the face of one of Trump's executive orders, as long as its citizens are suffering a concrete and particularized injury. That's a really big deal. And as much as we lawyers occasionally call it the Ninth Circuit for a reason, it's a powerful and influential court, and this is an important precedent even outside that circuit where it doesn't automatically apply. A state will still have to meet the requirement of standing, but at this point, we have been proceeding very uncertain as to who, if anybody, can contest these types of activities by Trump and his administration. So it's really reassuring to see the panel come down, strongly stating that a state standing is valid in this case, and they have some fantastic citations to past case precedent to back it up. The Ninth Circuit really did issue a very careful and fantastically long opinion to make sure that they really showed where they were getting that they were allowed to do this, and they were allowed to contest the president in an area that the court does acknowledge, even in its opinion, that they usually are accustomed to giving the president a great deal of deference. A word as well about all the negativity floating around. My entire feed is taken up right now by people who just don't remember how to be happy and who believe they are the first person to think that when and if a bomb finally does go off in the U.S. or abroad and a Muslim is behind it, that this is going to give Trump the power to discredit the courts entirely and suspend their activities. Now, I agree that's a concern. But let's bear in mind that our three-part government has stood a lot since 1776, and Trump will have a lot more trouble going after the judiciary than he and a lot of people think. The courts have struck down executive actions and orders even in times of war when they were found unconstitutional, and this situation should be no different. Lives were at stake then just as lives are at stake now, and we can't sacrifice our laws and constitution in the meantime. Further, it's worth bearing in mind that the Supreme Court, where all of this will end up, is seated with lifetime appointments who don't need to worry about re-election, and that's intentional. They are able to, and this is the theory, they are ideally able to rise above partisan bickering and see the bigger picture because they don't have to worry about people's opinions, don't have to worry about being re-elected next year. Honestly, the most fascinating thing about Trump's presidency so far has been this rather unique and fantastic view of every little safeguard that the framers have hid in the structure of our government. We're seeing exactly why term limits exist for certain officers and not others. It's fascinating, even if it's sort of the same way that watching a virus spread in a petri dish is fascinating. And for this case, either the Supreme Court is going to agree to hear it quickly on appeal from the Ninth Circuit if Trump appeals it, or the case is going to go back to Robart for a full trial and a new set of appeals where it will still get to the Supreme Court, but by then it's possibly one sitting with its full roster of 9 judges. So moving on, there's 3 new executive orders. Trump let us have a bit of a break, and now we have 3 out the gate yesterday. Claiming that a new era of justice is about to begin. Trump insists that he is restoring safety to America, remarking on the rise in violent crime and murder in the nation. A note on that, bear in mind as an aside, statistically these crimes are predominantly hate crimes against marginalized groups. And many, such as the murder of trans individuals, are believed to be going entirely unreported, or at very least reported as random incidents or murders rather than what they are, which is alt-right hate crimes. So Trump can pretend that America is getting more dangerous, but a lot of the crimes we are seeing, it's very likely that these have been inspired and emboldened by Trump's election. So we have a bit of a chicken and egg problem going on here. But Trump is going to save us from this with more executive orders. The first is the Task Force on Crime Reduction and Public Safety. Sounds an awful lot like the convergence of a new special police, doesn't it? The order essentially states that it's the policy of the executive branch to reduce crime in America and charges this new task force that he's creating with developing strategies on illegal immigration, drug trafficking, and violent crime. The group is also supposed to identify any deficiencies in existing laws and conduct whatever studies they think are necessary in order to eventually present those findings to the president in a year. The second order is titled Preventing Violence Against Federal, State, Tribal, and Local Law Enforcement. Yeah, President Trump, who just flagged the Dakota Access Pipeline to go forward yesterday, has the gall to talk about tribal law enforcement as though to try for some backhanded karma in this. In my opinion, this order is a little bit scarier of an order. It calls for a shiny new Attorney General Sessions to develop a strategy to use the existing laws to prosecute anyone who commits or tries to commit a crime of violence against law enforcement officers of any variety. And it also asks the Department of Justice to decide whether existing laws are sufficiently adequate, and by that we mean strict, with large sentences and penalties to protect those officers. If the Department of Justice decides that they aren't, if it thinks that these are deficient in any way, the department is then charged, along with Sessions, with drafting new laws that are adequate to do the job. To put this order in perspective, 135 police officers died in 2016 in the line of duty, and that includes officers dying from things like heart attacks in the line of duty as long as they were on the job. 968 people died at the hands of police in 2016, and we're already at 130 in 2017. Links to where I got those statistics are below. Trump then signs an executive order not only to protect police, but one which will define new federal crimes and increase penalties for the existing federal crimes in order to prevent that violence against federal and state police officers. I have the utmost respect for police officers, and they encounter daily situations that would literally paralyze me. And it's important to remember, I think, when we look at something like this executive order, that you can be pro-law enforcement as well as believe that there are individuals among them who might act badly given the opportunity. As a result, I am very anxious in a bad way to see how this order will actually impact the next act of violence committed either by an officer, because it seems to be giving them some new protections from being prosecuted, as well as what will happen to anyone that commits an act of violence against an officer, possibly in self-defense. Those are the two things I'm most worried about. Finally, the third order is a lot more of just a rehashing of laws that are already on the books. It's called Enforcing Federal Law with Respect to Transnational Criminal Organizations and Preventing International Trafficking. And it just directs law enforcement to essentially do a better job and direct more resources toward organized crime, gangs, and cartels. Moving on, there's kind of an impeachment rumor floating around that I really quickly wanted to address. Trump is not being impeached. He's nowhere near being impeached. We're all very upset he's not near being impeached, or at least half the nation is. But Jerry Nadler, who's a Democratic representative out of New York, filed something called a resolution of inquiry. And that charges the Attorney General, who again is now Sessions, with providing documents related to that inquiry to Congress to review. It's kind of like a legislative branch version of a discovery motion. It was filed specifically with respect to Trump's connections to foreign powers, no doubt specifically Russia, as well as his conflicts of interest with his own business. And they also requested documents related to Michael Flynn, Paul Manafort, Carter Page, and Roger Stone, all of whom have come under scrutiny for alleged ties with Russia, and all of them pretty close to Trump during his campaign and after his campaign. Hundreds of resolutions of inquiry have been introduced by Congress since 1947, but the last time one targeted the president was when good old Bill strayed from Hillary and then lied to the nation about it. So I think people have started throwing around the word impeachment as a result. So just a word of caution, a resolution of inquiry is referred to a committee, which has 14 legislative days to debate and vote on whether it should be reported to the floor. If the committee doesn't take action during those 14 days, the measure is then just called up to the House floor for a debate and a vote. it's pretty unlikely, in my opinion, they're going to take action on it in 14 days. And thus it will go to a Republican-owned House and probably fail there. Republicans have a majority, and I don't think they're done with Trump yet. I think that if and when we see a Trump impeachment, the Republicans are going to be the ones that try and pull the trigger on that and save us from a person that whose actions they don't want attached to their party. So it's very likely this action is more of a power play by the Democrats to look like they're trying to do something about all these shenanigans. But I don't see it going very far unless Sessions defects and the GOP changes their minds. Finally, some random fractured tidbits from elsewhere in the news today. Trump recommitted to the One China policy after a phone call with the Chinese president, Xi Jinping. That was Thursday evening, and it was definitely one of his finer mistakes right after election was the phone call with Taiwan that caused this big ado. So tensions are now said to have, while they were cool recently, they have now been reduced, and China seems fine with us again. Tom Price was confirmed as Health and Human Services Secretary. He's going to be Trump's point man in dismantling repairing the Affordable Care Act. There's also evidence circulating that Michael Flynn, Trump's national security advisor, may have discussed American sanctions with Russia, as well as areas of cooperation with the other nation's ambassador to the U.S. before Trump was elected. Despite the fact that federal officials possess these transcripts, thanks NSA, Trump's team has publicly denied that the topic of conversation included sanctions. That said, don't get your hopes up. Prosecution in these types of cases is fairly rare. The law is incredibly murky, particularly with an incoming administration. And those who have read the transcripts don't seem to believe that it's enough standing alone to bring any charges. That's your Friday recap. I hope that you have a fantastic weekend, and I will see you next week.